Hi, and welcome to this video. Here, we're going to talk about how to build up your labor catalog specifically for snow and ice in LMN's estimating and timesheet software. So we'll have a look at what you should have set up in your labor catalog and how to put the numbers in to make sure you're using the right numbers for estimating. Let's dive right in by taking a look at the labor catalog itself. So this is going to depend on you having a snow budget completed. So make sure you've got that first. If you haven't watched that section already, make sure you go back and watch the snow budgeting videos first. But if you aren't building a snow budget because it's just part of your company budget, or if you've already built your snow budget, you're ready to join in, the very first thing we need you to do is go to Item Catalog and then click on Labor so that you're looking at your labor catalog here. Just pay attention to the budget up top. This is the budget it's using to give you some of this pricing. If you're not using your budget for snow, make sure you've got your snow budget flagged there so that you're getting the right overhead and profit depending on your snow budget. Now, typically, you might have 3 different labor types for snow. I've got here equipment operator. That's for operators who drive some of the loaders, tractors, bigger equipment. I've got plow truck driver, and I've got walkway shoveler. Now, I have 3 set up, 3 different types of labor, because I generally have 3 different types of wages for snow staff. In general, your shovelers are sort of your lowest paid staff. Your plow drivers are sort of somewhere in the middle. And then at the upper end of the pay scale, you've got your equipment operators. So you could have more, you could have less, depending on how specific you want to get it. 3 tends to be sort of the right numbers for us. Everybody's wage is in or around one of those 3 numbers. Let's take a look at a plow driver because it's a pretty common one and it's sort of right in the middle. First thing is the name. I like to put snow before the name so that all my snow labor all start with snow. Makes it easy for estimating to find what we're looking for. So here I've got snow-plow driver. The units are in hours, it's man hours. And then I've got a description, internal notes if I need it. Sales tax, if I do charge that on labor. Of course, that's up to you and your government. And then over here, I've got all the details. Let's step through the details now. The first thing you want to look at is your average wage per man. So what this represents is the average hourly wage that you pay a plow truck driver. Now you can key that in if you know, well, yeah, it's $18 or $19 an hour, or you can hit the calculator button. It'll open up your budget and you can say, I've got these people as plow drivers, and it'll figure out the average wage of those people for you. So depending on how you've set your labor up, you can do the math manually, or you can go back to your budget and pull it that way. Now, next is your overtime factor. If you did pull it from the budget and you'd built overtime hours in your budget, it'll calculate your overtime factor for you. If you hadn't, a good rule of thumb is if you estimate 5 hours a week of overtime, then your overtime factor should be 5%. Or if it's 2 hours a week, it's 2%. What I might do is estimate the total amount of overtime I'm going to work in snow. Let's say, for example, you figure you're going to pay total for your snow season 40 hours of overtime. And if you did snow work for 20 weeks a year, 40 hours divided by 20 weeks is going to give you 2 hours a week. And so my overtime factor is going to be 2%. That'll calculate the right addition to the average wage to make sure we mark up that wage enough to recover overtime. If you want to see how that works, how translating hours to a percentage works, you can click this calculator here. It'll open up a spreadsheet. You can key in your own numbers and it'll calculate that percentage for you. Unbillable. This is the big question mark that a lot of contractors have when setting up our labor. So we're going to back to PowerPoint here just to go through what unbillable means. So your unbillable factor is the percentage of time your employees are getting paid, but that you're not charging them out or estimating them to a customer. Now, every company is different in the way they estimate. Some estimate drive time, some don't. So we're going to step through some of the factors that go into calculating your unbillable factor, so that you can make a better assessment of where your specific unbillable factor sits. These examples coming up are typical examples of unbillable, but they may not apply to everybody. So the first is, especially for plow truck drivers, shift setup and cleanup. So imagine your driver drives to your yard, they get out of their car, they clock in, then they go get their truck started and warmed up. They do an inspection of the plow truck. They may go over to a salt pile and load up with salt. They may have to load bags of salt. They may have to load shovels. This is all the time it takes them to get ready to leave their shift when it starts. Now, on the back end of their shift, when they come back at the end of their shift, they've got all those same tasks, but in reverse. They're cleaning off the salt. They're emptying any tools and equipment they don't need. They're cleaning up the truck and parking it properly. All time that's on payroll, the employee's getting paid for that time, but you're not charging that time necessarily to your customers. At least most contractors aren't. So right off the bat, in a given shift of, say, 10 hours, you've probably got an hour of setup and cleanup time, or 10% of unbillable time, just right there alone. We've also got drive time, and drive time is unestimated time between sites. So if you build drive time in your estimates, you don't really have to worry about that because you're building it right into your estimates. But if you don't consider drive time when you're estimating a job, or the cost of and the hours of drive time when you're estimating a job, then again, drive time can be handled as part of your unbillable factor. Let's continue with that example of a driver that works on average a 10-hour shift. Now, in that 10-hour shift, if on average they spend about an hour driving from site to site, when you add up all the drive times totally, then you've got another hour, so another 10%, that's 1 hour out of a 10-hour shift of drive time. And if you're following my examples as I've gone along, I had 10% of unbilled time from a shift setup and cleanup, and then I had to add another 10%, so now we're at 20% for unbilled drive time. Now again, drive time is only unbillable if you don't factor it into your estimates. Then you've also got time loading salt. So this would be, especially if you've already included some salt loading in your setup and cleanup, this would be if your drivers have to stop plowing or salting, drive back to the location where they're going to fill salt. And particularly if it's at a vendor, they've got to leave what they're doing and head over to the vendor. They got to wait in line. They got to get loaded. They got to wait for their paperwork, and they got to get out and get back to their sites. And again, if it's, say, half an hour a shift, now you're at half an hour, or 5% of a 10-hour shift, lost to unbillable time loading and reloading with salt. Rework, repairs, and cleanup is another example of some unbillable time. This one's a little harder to put your finger on it, but think about the time spent on payroll going back to fix mistakes on jobs, repairing equipment that perhaps broke during the shift, doing repairs to customers' sites if we've damaged fences or parking curbs, etc., and also cleaning up the sites at the end in the spring. Now again, all this assumes that you're not building this into your estimates. If you are building cleanup time in your estimates, you don't need to worry about that as part of your unbillable time. If you're paying your employees standby pay, that's another factor you have to consider for unbillable time. Now, some companies put standby pay in overhead, so it is covered as part of their overhead markups. Other companies need to make sure it's covered here. If you're paying employees for hours that aren't worked on customer job sites, then you have to make sure that whatever percentage of their payroll you think is paid for sitting at home being on standby, that's part of your unbillable percentage, because we have to make that back in the hours that we can charge our customers. And finally, you've got some unbillable time in things like training and meetings. And typically that's not a lot, but again, on a couple hundred hours a year of snow work, it's significant enough that you have to think about it. Now, unbillable time is also going to change by role type. You've got roles like plow truck drivers. Plow truck drivers going to start at the shop, and then they're going to clock in. They are going to get paid for inspecting the truck, loading the truck, driving to the first site. They're going to get paid each time they drive in between sites, even if you don't estimate that time to the jobs. They're going to get paid to sit in traffic, and they're going to get paid possibly to do salt refilling during their shift. All this time is likely unbillable. And again, some contractors may bill for drive time, etc. Equipment operators, on the other hand, typically have a very low unbillable time. Their setup time at the beginning of the shift is minimal. Oftentimes their equipment is parked right at the lot that they're working, so they simply drive to the lot, clock in, and they're ready to start. They typically have little drive time, probably none. Some contractors certainly move equipment from site to site, but in the case of a tractor that's parked at a mall that stays there and plows all night, you've got no downtime affecting your unbillable factor. And equipment, again, typically doesn't carry salt, so there's little to no salt loading or unloading time. So it's important to recognize that another good reason to create different labor types here, I've got equipment operator, plow driver, and walk shoveler, is because the unbillable times for these roles vary significantly. A plow driver could have anywhere from 25 to 40%, depending on your drive time, unbillable time based on their shift. Whereas an equipment operator who goes to a lot and stays there all night plowing could have a much lower unbillable percentage Anything from 5 to 10% could be realistic for that role. Now, if you set your unbillable factors up correctly, you're going to find that you're going to charge the right amount for plow truck drivers, especially those who have a lot of driving, and you'll be more competitive on jobs with equipment operators where unbillable time is minimal. Now, we'll take a look at one more example of a way to consider drive time and a factor, and that is potentially setting up plow truck drivers with 3 different items in your labor catalog. So you could have, for example, plow truck driver zone A, plow truck driver zone B, and plow truck driver zone C. As sites get further and further from your shop, your drive time increases. And what you could have is, for example, a plow truck driver with an unbillable percentage of, say, 25% for zone A. Zone B, their unbillable percentage increases because their driving increases. So maybe use an unbillable percentage of 30% for zone B. And zone C are sites that are even further from our shop, and maybe we use an unbillable factor of 35%. That way, the further away a site is from our shop, the more it's going to pay or the more our labor is going to cost to service that site, assuming that we're not estimating drive time in the cost of the jobs. So going back to our labor catalog and back to our plow truck driver, I've got a wage, you have an overtime factor, you have this unbillable factor, you have your labor burden, which is the cost of payroll taxes, workers' comp, and unemployment insurance, etc. That's coming from your budget as well. But double check that number to make sure it's still accurate. And then it's going to read your snow budget's overhead markup on labor to give me that number. Then going to give me a break even. And then based on whatever your budget's net profit margin is, and mine happened to be 20%, it's going to calculate the rate per hour that I need to charge for labor to make back all my costs. Now, it's important to recognize here, really important, that that rate per hour doesn't include equipment. So for a plow truck driver here, this is just the cost of the driver. It's not including the cost of the plow truck or any charge out rate for the plow truck. If I'm doing an equipment operator, as I am here, the cost of the equipment operator, again, does not include any cost for a loader, etc. So I'd add that in later. We're going to do that in the next section. And I've got down here the cost of a shoveler, which once again, doesn't include the cost of any way to get to site like a pickup truck or a van or a school bus, however you get your walkway shovelers to where they're going. You'll get out of LMN the charge out rate that you need to charge to make sure you're covering your overhead for snow and you're charging or making enough profit to hit the sales goal that you've set in snow as well. Now in the next section, we'll take a look at setting up your equipment on top of this so that we've got some equipment to estimate as well. If you had any questions about the content in this video, reach out to us at support@golmn.com. Or if you're looking at these screens for the first time and you want more information about LMN, visit our website at www.golmn.com.